Get comfortable, settle into your pillow, take a slow breath, and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going to walk through the complete lore of Bonnie. From the very beginning to the very end, every murder, every haunting, every desperate attempt at redemption and revenge. In the darkness of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the fluorescent lights flicker and die as midnight approaches, there stands a figure that has haunted the nightmares of security guards for decades. Bonnie the Bunny. A bluish-purple animatronic rabbit with a red bow tie and a guitar clutched in mechanical hands. To children during the day, he was a friendly entertainer, a member of the band that played cheerful songs and brought smiles to birthday parties. But when the lights go out and the restaurant falls silent, Bonnie becomes something else entirely. Something that moves through the shadows with purpose. Something that remembers. Bonnie was not always a vessel for vengeance. Once he was simply a machine, an animatronic designed to entertain, programmed to perform, built to bring joy to children who came to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for pizza and games and music. He stood on the left side of the stage, guitar in hand, playing alongside Freddy Fazbear and Chica the Chicken. The band would perform for hours, their movements smooth and practiced, their songs bright and cheerful. Children would gather around the stage, clapping and singing along, their faces lit with wonder and delight. Bonnie was good at his job. He made children happy. That was his purpose. But something happened at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Something terrible. Something that would transform Bonnie from an entertainer into a hunter, from a machine into a prison for a tortured soul. The incident is known in whispers and police reports as the missing children incident, though the full truth of what happened that day has been buried beneath layers of corporate cover-ups and sealed documents. What we know is this. 5 children entered Freddy Fazbear's Pizza one day in June. 5 children who were lured away from the safety of the dining area, away from their parents, away from the light. 5 children who followed a man in a yellow rabbit suit, a spring Bonnie costume, into the back rooms where customers were not supposed to go. The man in the spring Bonnie suit was William Afton, though the children did not know his name. They didn't know that he was a killer, that he had done this before, that he would do it again. They only knew that the rabbit was smiling, that he promised them something special, that he seemed friendly and safe. Children trust people in costumes. Children believe that someone dressed as a cartoon character must be good. This trust was their undoing. William Afton murdered those 5 children in the back rooms of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The details of how he killed them are mercifully vague, lost to time and trauma, but the result is clear. 5 small bodies. 5 young lives ended before they had barely begun. 5 souls ripped from the world of the living, confused and terrified and angry. Afton hid the bodies, stuffed them into the animatronic suits that stood dormant in the back rooms. 1 body in Freddy, 1 in Chica, 1 in Foxy, 1 in Golden Freddy, and 1 in Bonnie. The child whose body was hidden inside Bonnie's animatronic shell was named Jeremy. He was young, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with his whole life ahead of him. He had come to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for a birthday party, excited to see the animatronics perform, eager to play games and eat pizza and celebrate with friends. He never went home. His parents reported him missing. The police searched. But Jeremy's body was never found, at least not in a way that anyone recognized. Because Jeremy was inside Bonnie now, hidden within the metal and wires and servos, his small form compressed into spaces that were never meant to hold human remains. But death was not the end for Jeremy. Something happened when his body was placed inside the animatronic. Something that the killer did not anticipate. The marionette. But another animatronic possessed by the spirit of a murdered child found the bodies. The marionette had the power to give life, to bind souls to the machines, to ensure that the dead children would not simply fade away into nothing. The marionette placed masks on the bodies, performed some ritual or process that we do not fully understand, and the children's souls were bound to the animatronics. Jeremy's soul was bound to Bonnie. At first, Jeremy did not understand what had happened to him. He was confused, disoriented, trapped in darkness. He could not move his body, could not speak, could not cry out for help. He was inside something, surrounded by metal and wires, his consciousness fragmented and strange. Time passed differently for him now. Days and nights blurred together, and he could hear things. The sounds of the restaurant during operating hours, children laughing and playing, music from the stage. But he could not respond, could not make himself known. He was a prisoner in his own death, trapped inside the machine that had become his tomb. But gradually Jeremy learned to control the animatronic. His soul, his consciousness, his rage and confusion and fear began to merge with Bonnie's systems. He learned to move the mechanical limbs, to turn the head, to make the eyes glow. At night, when the restaurant was closed and the animatronics were left in their free-roaming mode, to prevent their servos from locking up, Jeremy could take control. He could make Bonnie walk. He could make Bonnie search. He could make Bonnie hunt. Because Jeremy remembered. Not everything, not clearly, but enough. He remembered the man in the yellow rabbit suit. He remembered being led into the back rooms. He remembered the moment when he realized something was wrong, when the friendly rabbit's demeanor changed, when he tried to run but it was too late. He remembered pain and fear and the desperate, futile hope that someone would save him. No one did. And now Jeremy was dead, but he was not gone. He was still here, still trapped, still angry, and he wanted revenge. The problem was that Jeremy could not remember what his killer looked like. The spring Bonnie suit had hidden William Afton's face. Jeremy's memories were fragmented, traumatic, unreliable. He knew that a person had killed him, a man, someone who worked at the restaurant or had access to it, but he could not identify who. So Jeremy, trapped inside Bonnie, made a terrible assumption. He assumed that anyone who worked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza at night, anyone who was alone in the building after hours, anyone who wore the uniform of a security guard might be his killer. And so Bonnie began to hunt the night guards. The first security guard to encounter Bonnie's wrath did not survive the night. The official report said it was an accident, that the guard had been stuffed into a Freddy Fazbear suit due to the animatronic's malfunction. But those who knew the truth understood what had really happened. Bonnie had found the guard in the office, had cornered him, had dragged him screaming to the back rooms. The animatronics believed that anyone in the restaurant at night was the killer. It was William Afton returned to the scene of his crime. They could not tell the difference between an innocent security guard and a murderer. Their programming had been overridden by rage and confusion and the desperate need for justice. Bonnie's behaviour at night follows a pattern, though it is a pattern born of a child's logic twisted by death and trauma. He starts on the stage, standing in his designated spot with his guitar. But as midnight passes and the restaurant falls into deeper darkness, Bonnie begins to move. He leaves the stage first before the others, as if he's the most eager to begin the hunt. He moves through the building with purpose, checking rooms, searching corners, looking for the person he believes killed him. Bonnie's path through the restaurant is methodical. He moves from the stage to the dining area, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. He checks the supply closet, a small room filled with cleaning supplies and spare parts. He moves to the backstage area where the animatronic heads and costumes are stored, where the smell of decay and old electronics hangs heavy in the air. He appears in the West Hall, his silhouette visible in the dim emergency lighting, his eyes glowing white in the darkness, and eventually, inevitably, he makes his way to the office, where the security guard sits watching cameras and checking doors, hoping to survive until 6 a.m. When Bonnie appears in the doorway of the office, there is a moment of terrible stillness. The animatronic stands there, towering over the guard, his mechanical body twitching slightly as servos adjust and recalibrate. His eyes glow with an unnatural light. His head tilts to the side in a gesture that might seem curious or playful if it were not so deeply wrong. And then, if the guard has not closed the door in time, Bonnie moves forward. The lights go out, there is a scream, and then silence. What happens in those moments when Bonnie catches a security guard is not fully documented, but the results are clear. The guard disappears. Sometimes their body is found stuffed into an animatronic suit, the metal endoskeleton crushing their bones, their face frozen in an expression of terror. Sometimes they are simply never seen again, their fate unknown, their family left to wonder what happened in those dark hours between midnight and dawn. The official explanation is always the same: malfunction, accident, tragic, but unavoidable. But the truth is darker. The truth is that Bonnie, possessed by the vengeful spirit of a murdered child, is killing anyone he finds in the restaurant at night, believing them to be his murderer. Bonnie's appearance has deteriorated over the years. The animatronic that once looked friendly and inviting now appears worn and damaged. His bluish-purple fur is matted and stained. His red bow tie is faded and torn. His guitar is scratched and dented. But the most disturbing changes are to his face. Bonnie's eyes, which once had a gentle, cartoonish quality, now glow with an eerie white light that seems to come from within. His mouth, frozen in a permanent smile, seems more like a grimace, a rictus of pain and rage. And sometimes, if you look closely in the right light, you can see something else in those eyes. A flicker of awareness, a hint of the child trapped inside, screaming silently for help that will never come. The other animatronics, Freddy, Chica, Foxy, are also possessed by the spirits of murdered children, and they too hunt the night guards. But Bonnie is different. Bonnie is the most aggressive, the most relentless, the most likely to leave his designated area and search for victims. Some believe this is because Jeremy's death was particularly traumatic, or because his soul is more strongly bound to the animatronic, or because Bonnie's position on the left side of the stage gives him easier access to the rest of the restaurant. But the truth may be simpler and more tragic. Bonnie hunts because Jeremy is still a child, still confused, still terrified, still desperately trying to make sense of what happened to him, and in his confusion, he lashes out at anyone he can reach, hoping that one of them will be the man who killed him. The restaurant's management knows about the animatronic's behavior. They must know. The turnover rate for night security guards is impossibly high. Guards quit after one night, traumatized by what they have seen. Others disappear entirely, their fates covered up by corporate lawyers and hush money paid to grieving families. But Freddy Fazbear's Pizza continues to operate, continues to hire new guards, continues to send them into the building at night with nothing but a flashlight and a set of security cameras. The company values its reputation and its profits more than it values human life. As long as the incidents happen at night, when no customers are present, the company can maintain plausible deniability. The show must go on. There have been attempts to decommission Bonnie, to take him apart and destroy the animatronic that has killed so many people, but these attempts have failed. When technicians try to dismantle Bonnie, strange things happen. Tools malfunction, equipment breaks, workers report feeling watched, feeling a presence in the room with them, feeling a cold dread that makes them abandon their work and flee the building. Some technicians have been injured during these attempts, crushed by falling equipment or shocked by electrical malfunctions that should not have been possible. It is as if Bonnie, or the spirit inside him, is protecting itself, refusing to be destroyed, clinging to existence with a desperation born of unfinished business. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, a prequel to the original game, we see an earlier version of Bonnie before the murders, before the possession. This Bonnie is brighter, cleaner, more obviously designed for children. But even this earlier version has an unsettling quality, a wrongness that is hard to define. Perhaps it is the knowledge of what this animatronic will become, the awareness that this cheerful entertainer will soon be a vessel for a murdered child's rage. Or perhaps there was always something wrong with Bonnie, something in his design or his programming that made him the perfect prison for a tortured soul. The toy Bonnie that appears in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is a different animatronic entirely, a newer model designed to replace the original. Toy Bonnie is brighter, more colourful, with a more modern design. But Toy Bonnie is also possessed, also dangerous, also hunting night guards through the darkened restaurant. The cycle of death and possession continues, as if Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is cursed, as if the building itself attracts tragedy and violence. But it is the original Bonnie, the withered, damaged Bonnie from the first game, who remains the most terrifying. This is the Bonnie who's been possessed the longest, who's killed the most people, who's had years to merge with Jeremy's tortured soul. This is the Bonnie who appears in the doorway of the office, his eyes glowing, his body twitching, his presence radiating malevolence and pain. This is the Bonnie who represents the ultimate tragedy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Innocent children murdered, their souls trapped in machines, their deaths covered up and forgotten, their killers never brought to justice. Jeremy's story does not have a happy ending. There is no resolution, no peace, no justice. He remains trapped inside Bonnie. His consciousness fragmented and confused, his existence a nightmare from which he cannot wake. He kills security guards, believing them to be his murderer, never understanding that he is killing innocent people, never realizing that his quest for revenge is only creating more victims, more tragedy, more pain. Jeremy is both victim and monster, both innocent child and vengeful spirit, both prisoner and executioner. The true horror of Bonnie is not just that he is dangerous, not just that he kills people, but that he is a tragedy given physical form. Every time Bonnie moves through the darkened restaurant, every time his eyes glow in the shadows, every time he appears in a doorway with his head tilted and his smile frozen, we are witnessing the aftermath of a child's murder. We are seeing what happens when innocence is destroyed, when justice fails, when the dead cannot rest. Bonnie is a monument to failure, the failure to protect children, the failure to catch a killer, the failure to give the dead peace. William Afton, the man who killed Jeremy and the other children, eventually faced consequences for his crimes, though not in the way one might hope. Afton was killed by the very spring Bonnie suit he had used to lure children to their deaths, the spring locks failing and crushing him inside the costume. But even death could not end Afton's evil. His soul, like the children's souls, became trapped in the animatronic, and he continued to exist as Springtrap, a rotting corpse inside a rotting suit, still moving, still aware, still causing harm. The killer and his victims, all trapped in machines, all unable to move on, all locked in an eternal cycle of violence and revenge. The restaurant where Bonnie performed, where Jeremy died, where so many security guards met their end, has been closed and reopened multiple times over the years. Each time the company promises that the problems have been fixed, that the animatronics are safe, that what happened before will not happen again. And each time the promises prove to be lies. The animatronics continue to move at night. The security guards continue to disappear. The cycle continues, unbroken, unstoppable. There are theories about how to free the children's souls from the animatronics, how to give them peace, how to end the nightmare. Some believe that destroying the animatronics completely will release the souls. Others think that bringing William Afton to justice, making him pay for his crimes, will allow the children to move on. Still others believe that the souls are trapped forever, that there is no escape, that Bonnie and the others will continue to exist in their mechanical prisons until the end of time. In 5 Nights, at Freddy's 3, set 30 years after the original murders, we learn that the original animatronics, including Bonnie, have been destroyed. Their parts have been scattered, their bodies dismantled. But even this is not enough to free Jeremy's soul. The spirit remains, trapped in the fragments, unable to move on, unable to find peace. The destruction of the physical form does not destroy the soul. The nightmare continues. The final fate of Bonnie and Jeremy is revealed in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the 6th game in the series. The animatronics, including Bonnie, are lured into a trap. A fake restaurant designed to gather all the possessed machines in one place, and then the building is set on fire, burned to the ground, with the animatronics and the souls inside them consumed by flames. This is meant to be the end, the final release, the moment when the children's souls are finally freed from their mechanical prisons. But even this ending is ambiguous, uncertain. Do the souls find peace in the fire? Are they released to whatever afterlife awaits them? Or do they simply cease to exist, their consciousness extinguished along with the machines that housed them? The game does not provide clear answers. We see gravestones, suggesting that the children are finally at rest. But we also know that in the world of 5 Nights at Freddy's, death is rarely permanent, and evil has a way of returning no matter how many times it is destroyed. Bonnie the Bunny is more than just a video game antagonist, more than just a scary animatronic that chases players through darkened hallways. Bonnie is a symbol of innocence destroyed, of justice denied, of the terrible things that happen when evil is allowed to flourish unchecked. Every time Bonnie appears in a doorway, every time his eyes glow in the darkness, every time he reaches out with mechanical hands to grab another victim, we're reminded of Jeremy, the child who died too young, who never got to grow up, who never got to live the life he deserved. The story of Bonnie is a ghost story, a tragedy, A horror tale that resonates because it touches on our deepest fears. The fear of harm coming to children, the fear of evil hiding behind friendly faces, the fear that death is not the end, that suffering can continue beyond the grave, that some wrongs can never be made right. Bonnie embodies all of these fears, wraps them in bluish-purple fur and a red bow tie, and sends them stalking through the darkness of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In the quiet hour of the night, when the restaurant is dark and empty, when the only sounds are the hum of electronics and the distant creak of old buildings settling, Bonnie stands on his stage. His guitar hangs loose in his mechanical hands. His eyes are dark, lifeless. He looks like nothing more than a machine, an animatronic designed to entertain children, harmless and inert. But as midnight approaches, something changes. The eyes begin to glow. The head turns slightly as if listening to something only he can hear. And then Bonnie steps down from the stage and begins to move through the darkness, searching, hunting, driven by a child's confused rage and a desperate need for justice that will never come. This is the curse of Bonnie the Bunny. This is the tragedy of Jeremy, the murdered child whose soul cannot rest. This is the horror of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where children's entertainment and children's nightmares exist in the same space, where the line between machine and ghost has been erased, where the dead walk and the innocent suffer and the guilty escape justice. And as long as Bonnie exists, as long as Jeremy's soul remains trapped inside that mechanical body, the nightmare will continue, the hunt will go on. And somewhere in the darkness, a bluish-purple rabbit with glowing eyes is searching for you, believing you might be the one who killed him, ready to make you pay for crimes you did not commit. Sleep well, knowing that Bonnie is out there, in the darkness, waiting, always watching, always hunting. The animatronic that was meant to bring joy to children now brings only terror and death. The machine that was designed to entertain now exists only to destroy. And the child who should have lived a long and happy life is instead trapped in an endless nightmare, unable to wake, unable to escape, unable to find the peace that death should have brought him. This is the lore of Bonnie the Bunny. This is the story of Jeremy, the murdered child. This is the horror of Five Nights at Freddy's. And it all begins with the simple question: do you hear that sound? That heavy mechanical footstep echoing through the darkness? That's Bonnie. He's coming. He's always coming. And when he finds you, when those glowing eyes appear in your doorway, when that mechanical hand reaches out to grab you, you will understand the true meaning of fear. You will understand what it means to be hunted by something that was once innocent, something that was once a child, something that should have been protected but was instead destroyed. And in that final moment, as the lights go out and the screaming begins, you might spare a thought for Jeremy, the boy who never got to grow up, who never got to live, who is trapped forever in a machine, searching for justice he will never find, seeking revenge against people who never harmed him, lost in a nightmare that has no end. This is Bonnie's curse. This is Jeremy's tragedy. This is the horror that waits in the darkness of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where the animatronics come alive at night, and the dead refuse to stay dead, and the innocent pay the price for the guilty's crimes. The bunny is watching. The bunny is waiting. The bunny remembers, and the bunny will never ever stop hunting. But to understand Bonnie fully, to grasp the depth of the horror that he represents, we must go back further. We must understand the man who created this nightmare, the killer who set these events in motion, the monster who wore a friendly face and a rabbit costume. William Afton was not always a murderer, though perhaps the seeds of what he would become were always there, waiting for the right circumstances to bloom into something terrible. Afton was a businessman, an inventor, or a co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment alongside Henry Emily. Together, they created something revolutionary in the entertainment industry: springlock animatronics. These were hybrid suits that could function both as animatronic performers and as wearable costumes for human employees. The technology was ingenious. Spring locks that could be wound back to compress the animatronic components, creating space for a person to climb inside and perform as the character. It allowed for a level of interactivity that traditional animatronics could not provide. Children could hug Spring Bonnie or Fredbear and feel like they were embracing a real character, not just a machine. But the Springlock suits were dangerous. The mechanisms were delicate, sensitive to moisture and sudden movements. If the Springlocks failed while someone was inside the suit, the animatronic components would snap back into place with tremendous force, crushing and impaling the person wearing it. There were accidents. Employees were injured. Some died. The Springlock suits were eventually retired, deemed too dangerous for regular use, locked away in back rooms and storage facilities. But William Afton remembered them. He remembered how the Spring Bonnie suit had allowed him to get close to children, to gain their trust, to lead them away from safety. The exact moment when William Afton decided to kill his first child is lost to history. Perhaps there was no single moment, no clear decision, but rather a gradual descent into darkness. What we know is that by the early 1980s, Afton had become a serial killer, using his position at Fazbear Entertainment to access victims. He would don the Spring Bonnie suit, transforming himself into a friendly cartoon character, and lure children away from the main dining areas. The children trusted the rabbit. Why wouldn't they? The rabbit was part of the show, part of the magic of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The rabbit would never hurt them. But the rabbit did hurt them. The rabbit killed them. And then the rabbit hid their bodies inside the animatronic suits, stuffing small corpses into spaces never meant to hold human remains, leaving them to rot in the darkness while the restaurant continued to operate, while parents searched desperately for their missing children, while police investigations went nowhere because the bodies were hidden in plain sight, inside the very machines that entertained the crowds. Jeremy was not the first child William Afton killed. The order of the murders is disputed. Psychopathy, lost in the fog of trauma and time, but most accounts suggest that a girl named Susie was the first victim. Susie had a dog, a beloved pet that had recently died. Afton used this knowledge, told Susie that her dog was still alive, that he could take her to see it. Susie followed the man in the Spring Bonnie suit, trusting, hopeful, desperate to believe that her dog had somehow survived. She was led to the back rooms. She never came out. Her body was hidden inside Chica, the yellow chicken animatronic. Her soul, like Jeremy's, was bound to the machine by the marionette's intervention. After Susie came Gabriel, whose body was placed inside Freddy Fazbear himself, the main attraction, the face of the franchise. Then Fritz, stuffed into Foxy, the pirate fox animatronic that lurked behind a curtain in Pirate Cove. And then Jeremy, then hidden inside Bonnie. The fifth victim, a child whose name may have been Cassidy, was placed inside a mysterious fifth animatronic, sometimes called Golden Freddy, a ghostly yellow bear that appears and disappears without explanation, that crashes games and breaks reality, that seems to exist outside the normal rules that govern the other possessed machines. These 5 children, murdered on or around June 26th in the mid-1980s, became known as the missing children. Their disappearance made local news. Parents were terrified. The police investigated. Surveillance footage showed a man in a mascot costume leading children to the back rooms. But the footage was grainy, unclear, insufficient for a conviction. William Afton was arrested, questioned, but ultimately released due to lack of evidence. The bodies were never found. The children were declared missing, presumed dead. And Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, after a brief closure and some bad publicity, reopened. The show had to go on. There was money to be made, but the children did not stay dead. The marionette, possessed by the spirit of Charlie Emily, Henry Emily's daughter, William Afton's first victim, killed outside of Freddy's location in an act of cruelty that predated the missing children incident, found the bodies. The marionette understood what had happened, understood that these children deserved a chance at something beyond death, even if that something was twisted and wrong. The marionette gave them life, bound their souls to the animatronics, ensured that they would not simply fade away into nothing. It was an act of mercy, perhaps, or an act of revenge, or simply the only thing the marionette knew how to do: give life, give gifts, give the dead a chance to hunt their killer. And so Jeremy woke up inside Bonnie, confused and terrified and angry. He was not alone in his suffering. Susie was inside Chica, Gabriel inside Freddy, Fritz inside Foxy, Cassidy inside Golden Freddy. 5 children, 5 animatronics, 5 souls bound to machines, all searching for the man who killed them, all unable to remember his face clearly enough to identify him, all lashing out at anyone who entered the restaurant at night, hoping that one of them would be William Afton, hoping that one of them would give them the revenge they desperately needed. The tragedy of the missing children is compounded by the fact that William Afton continued to work at Fazbear Entertainment for years after the murders. He was never convicted, never punished, never held accountable. He walked the halls of the restaurant where he had killed 5 children, perhaps feeling pride in his cleverness, perhaps feeling nothing at all. Psychologists who have studied the case, or rather, the fictionalized accounts of the case, since the true details remain sealed, suggest that Afton was a psychopath, someone incapable of empathy or remorse, someone who killed not out of passion or rage but out of curiosity, out of a desire to see what would happen, out of a need to exert control over life and death. But Afton's crimes did not end with the missing children. There were other victims, other deaths, other tragedies that can be traced back to his actions. In 1983, before the missing children incident, there was another bite, another child harmed by the animatronics. This earlier incident, sometimes called the Bite of 83, involved a young boy, possibly Afton's own son, though this detail is disputed, whose head was crushed by the jaws of Fredbear, a golden bear animatronic that was the original mascot of the franchise. The boy was placed inside Fredbear's mouth as a cruel prank by older children, including his own brother. The animatronic's jaws closed, crushing the child's skull, destroying his frontal lobe. The boy died days later in a hospital, his last moments filled with nightmares of the animatronics that had killed him. This incident should have been a warning. It should have prompted a complete overhaul of safety procedures, a re-evaluation of the animatronics' design, a recognition that these machines were dangerous. But Fazbear Entertainment, more concerned with profits than safety, are simply rebranded. Fredbear's Family Diner became Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The spring-lock suits were retired from regular use, and the company continued to operate, continued to put children in danger, continued to prioritize entertainment and revenue over human life. Years later, in 1987, there was another bite, another victim. This incident, known as the Bite of 87, occurred at a newer Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, one that featured redesigned toy animatronics alongside the older withered versions of the original characters. The victim was a day shift employee, or possibly a customer, someone who got too close to one of the animatronics, likely Mangle, a twisted, broken version of Foxy that had been torn apart and reassembled by children so many times that it no longer resembled its original form. The animatronic bit down on the victim's head, removing their frontal lobe. Miraculously, the victim survived, though they were never the same, their personality and cognitive functions permanently altered by the loss of brain tissue. The Bite of 87 led to new restrictions on the animatronics. They were no longer allowed to walk around during the day. Their movements were limited, their interactions with customers restricted. But the damage was done. The public's trust in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was eroding. Parents were reluctant to bring their children to a place where animatronics had killed and maimed. The franchise was dying, slowly but inevitably, crushed under the weight of its own dark history. And through it all, Bonnie continued to exist, continued to hunt, continued to search for William Afton, Jeremy's soul. Trapped inside the animatronic, experienced time differently than the living. Nights blurred together, years passed in what felt like moments or eternities, time losing all meaning in the darkness of death. Jeremy hunted security guards, believing each one might be his killer, never understanding that he was creating new victims, new tragedies, new families torn apart by loss. The security guards who worked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were, in many ways, victims themselves. They were typically young people, desperate for work, willing to take a job that paid minimum wage for 6 hours of sitting in an office and watching security cameras. The job advertisements never mentioned the danger, never warned applicants that the animatronics moved at night, never explained that previous guards had died or disappeared. The company simply hired new guards, sent them into the building with minimal training, and waited to see if they would survive the week. Some guards lasted one night before quitting, traumatized by the experience of seeing Bonnie's glowing eyes in the doorway, of hearing the heavy footsteps approaching through the darkness, of feeling the primal terror that comes from being hunted by something that should not be alive. Other guards lasted longer, learning the patterns, mastering the security systems, figuring out how to survive until 6 a.m. when the animatronics returned to their dormant state. But even the guards who survived were changed by the experience. They had nightmares. They developed anxiety disorders. They could never quite shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, of being prey. One security guard, a man named Mike Schmidt, who worked at the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in the early 1990s, survived 5 nights and then returned for a 6th and 7th night, despite having every reason to quit and never come back. His motivations for returning are unclear. Perhaps he needed the money. Perhaps he felt a sense of responsibility, a need to understand what was happening in the restaurant. Or perhaps he was connected to the tragedies in some way, drawn back to the location by guilt or curiosity or a desire for answers. Mike Schmidt survived his week at Freddy's, but the experience left scars that would never fully heal. Another guard, Jeremy Fitzgerald, sharing a name with the child possessing Bonnie, a coincidence that feels too cruel to be random, worked at the newer Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in 1987, when the location with the toy animatronics. Jeremy Fitzgerald survived 6 nights, dealing not only with the toy animatronics but also with the older withered versions of Bonnie, Freddy, Chica and Foxy that were kept in the back rooms, their bodies damaged and decayed, their appearances even more nightmarish than the originals. On his 7th night, Jeremy Fitzgerald was moved to the day shift, a reward for surviving the week. It was during this day shift that the bite of 87 occurred. Whether Jeremy Fitzgerald was the victim of the bite is unclear, but the timing suggests a connection, another life destroyed by the curse of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The restaurant locations themselves seemed cursed, as if the buildings were soaked in so much tragedy and death that they could never be cleansed. Multiple Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations opened and closed over the years, each one plagued by incidents, each one eventually shut down due to health code violations or safety concerns, or simply because the smell of decay, the smell of the bodies hidden inside the animatronics, became too strong to ignore. The company would rebrand, relocate, try again with new animatronics and new promises of safety. But the curse followed them. The dead children followed them. Bonnie followed them. In the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, the one where Mike Schmidt worked, the building was old and decrepit even in the early 1990s. The walls were stained. The carpet was worn. The animatronics were falling apart, their fur matted, their endoskeletons visible through tears in their fabric skin. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, a smell that the company tried to cover with industrial cleaners and air fresheners, but could never quite eliminate. Customers complained, health inspectors noted violations, but the restaurant stayed open, kept operating, kept putting children in danger, because shutting down would mean admitting that something was wrong, would mean acknowledging the deaths and the cover-ups and the decades of negligence. Bonnie, in this original location, was a withered, damaged version of his former self. His face was partially missing, exposing the metal endoskeleton beneath. His left hand was gone, leaving only a tangle of wires and servos. His body was covered in stains and tears, but he was still functional, still able to move, still possessed by Jeremy's angry, confused soul. This withered Bonnie was perhaps even more terrifying than the original, because his damage made him look less like a friendly entertainer and more like what he truly was, a corpse inside a machine, a ghost wearing metal skin, a monument to tragedy and injustice. The phone guy, a trainer who left recorded messages for new security guards, tried to explain the animatronics' behaviour in his calls. He spoke of the animatronics' free roaming mode, a feature that prevented their servos from locking up by allowing them to walk around at night. He mentioned that the animatronics might try to stuff any person they found into a Freddy Fazbear suit, believing them to be an endoskeleton without its costume. He spoke in a calm, almost cheerful voice, as if the danger was minimal, as if being stuffed into a suit filled with animatronic components and crossbeams and wires was just a minor inconvenience rather than a death sentence. But the phone guy knew more than he said. His later messages became more urgent, more frightened. He mentioned the bite of 87. He warned about Golden Freddy. He spoke of the animatronics' behaviour becoming more aggressive, more unpredictable. And then, on night 4, the phone guy's final message played. and in the background the sounds of animatronics breaking into his office could be heard. Bonnie's groaning, Freddy's music box melody, the phone guy's screams, and then silence. The phone guy became another victim, another person killed by the animatronics, another death that Fazbear Entertainment would cover up and deny. William Afton, meanwhile, continued to evade justice. He continued to work, continued to kill, continued to experiment with the animatronics and the souls trapped inside them. Afton became obsessed with immortality, with the idea that consciousness could be preserved beyond death, that the soul could be bound to a machine and continue to exist indefinitely. He saw the possessed animatronics not as tragedies but as successes, as proof that his theories about life and death were correct. He began to experiment more boldly, killing more children, creating more possessed animatronics, building a twisted empire of death and undeath. But Afton's hubris would eventually be his downfall. Years after the missing children incident, after the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had finally closed for good, Afton returned to the abandoned building. His reasons for returning are unclear. Perhaps he wanted to destroy evidence. Perhaps he was drawn back to the scene of his crimes by some psychological compulsion. Or perhaps he simply wanted to see the animatronics one more time, to admire his handiwork, to revel in the suffering he had caused. But when Afton entered the abandoned restaurant, he found that he was not alone. The animatronics were still there, still active, still possessed by the spirits of the children he had murdered. And somehow, in that moment, the children recognized him. Perhaps it was his scent, or his gait, or simply the fact that he had returned to the place where he had killed them. The animatronics began to move, began to chase him through the darkened building. Bonnie, Freddy, Chica, Foxy, all of them converging on William Afton, all of them driven by a rage that had been building for years. Afton ran, terrified for perhaps the first time in his life, fleeing from the machines he had created, from the children he had murdered. He found himself cornered in a back room, the animatronics closing in, their eyes glowing in the darkness. In desperation, Afton climbed into the old spring Bonnie suit, the same suit he had worn when he lured the children to their deaths. He thought the suit would protect him, would hide him, would allow him to escape. But the suit was old, damaged, and the room was damp. Water dripped from the ceiling, moisture seeping into the spring lock mechanisms. The spring locks failed. All at once, with a series of sharp clicks and snaps, the animatronic components that had been compressed to make room for Afton's body sprang back into place. Metal rods and crossbeams and sharp edges drove into Afton's flesh, piercing his organs, crushing his bones, impaling him from dozens of angles simultaneously. Afton screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the abandoned restaurant. Blood poured from his wounds, pooling inside the suit, soaking into the fabric and metal. He tried to remove the suit, but it was too late. The spring locks had locked into place. He was trapped, dying slowly, his body crushed and broken inside the spring Bonnie costume. But William Afton did not die, not completely. Just as the children's souls had been bound to the animatronics, Afton's soul became bound to the spring Bonnie suit. He became Springtrap, a horrific fusion of man and machine, a rotting corpse inside a rotting costume, still conscious, still aware, still trapped. The children's spirits, having witnessed Afton's fate, finally found some measure of peace. They had seen their killer suffer. They had seen him trapped just as they were trapped. It was not justice, not really, but it was something. Some of the spirits were able to move on to finally rest, but others, including Jeremy, remained bound to their animatronic prisons, unable or unwilling to let go of their rage and pain. Springtrap, the creature that had once been William Afton, was eventually discovered and moved to a horror attraction called Fazbear's Fright, a twisted museum dedicated to the dark history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The attraction's owners thought they had found a genuine animatronic from the original restaurant, a valuable piece of memorabilia that would draw crowds and make money. They did not realise that the animatronic was possessed, that it contained the rotting corpse of a serial killer, that it was still dangerous. Springtrap killed again at Fazbear's Fright, adding more victims to his count, proving that even death could not stop William Afton's evil. The attraction burned down, set ablaze by a security guard who realised the danger, who understood that Springtrap needed to be destroyed. But fire could not kill Springtrap. The creature survived, crawled from the wreckage, and continued to exist, continued to hunt, continued to spread suffering wherever it went. Afton's soul, like the children's souls, was trapped in a cycle of violence and revenge that seemed to have no end. Bonnie, meanwhile, continued his own existence in whatever form he took. In some timelines, some iterations of the story, Bonnie was destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. There was withered Bonnie, damaged and faceless. There was Toy Bonnie, a newer, brighter version that was still possessed and still dangerous. There was Nightmare Bonnie, a twisted, horrific version that appeared in the nightmares of a child traumatized by the animatronics. There was Rockstar Bonnie, Glamrock Bonnie, and countless other variations, each one a different manifestation of the same cursed character, each one carrying some echo of Jeremy's trapped soul. The multiplicity of Bonnies across different games and timelines speaks to the nature of the curse. It is not just one animatronic that is haunted, but the very concept of Bonnie, the idea of the friendly blue rabbit that entertains children. The curse has infected the character itself, ensuring that every version of Bonnie, in every iteration of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, carries some taint of the original tragedy. Jeremy's death has echoed across time and space, creating ripples that affect every Bonnie that has ever existed or will ever exist. The psychological impact of being trapped inside an animatronic, of existing as a ghost bound to a machine, is difficult to comprehend. Jeremy's consciousness, fragmented and confused, experiences reality in a way that no living person can understand. He is aware, but his awareness is limited, filtered through the animatronic's sensors and systems. He can see, but only through cameras and light sensors. He can hear, but sounds are distorted, mechanical. He can move, but his movements are constrained by servos and joints and programming. He's neither fully alive nor fully dead, existing in a liminal space between states, trapped in a nightmare from which there is no waking. Time for Jeremy has lost all meaning. He does not remember his life before death clearly. He does not remember his family, his friends, his hopes and dreams. Those memories are faded, eroded by years of existing as something other than human. What remains is emotion, fear, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for revenge against the person who killed him. But even these emotions are distorted, amplified and twisted by the unnatural state of his existence. Jeremy's rage is not the rage of a living person, but something colder, more mechanical, more relentless. It is the rage of a machine programmed to hunt, combined with the desperate fury of a child who died too soon. The other children trapped in the animatronics experience similar torment. Susie, inside Chica, searches endlessly for her dog, the pet she was promised she would see again. Gabriel, inside Freddy, tries to maintain some sense of leadership, some attempt to organise the other spirits, but his efforts are hampered by confusion and the limitations of his mechanical body. Fritz, inside Foxy, is perhaps the most aggressive, the most willing to attack, his pirate persona merging with his rage to create something truly dangerous. And Cassidy, inside Golden Freddy, exists in a state even more strange and disconnected than the others, able to appear and disappear at will, able to break the rules that govern the other animatronics, driven by a hatred so intense that it warps reality itself. These 5 children, bound together by their shared tragedy, form a kind of family in death, though it is a dysfunctional, broken family, united only by their suffering and their need for revenge. They communicate with each other in ways that are not quite language, sharing emotions and impressions through the network of animatronic systems that connect them. They hunt together, coordinate their attacks on security guards, work as a team to corner and kill their victims, but they are not truly cooperating, not in any meaningful sense. They are simply 5 separate nightmares that happen to occupy the same space, 5 tragedies that have been forced together by circumstance. The restaurant itself, the physical space of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, has become a kind of purgatory, a place where the dead cannot rest and the living cannot escape. The building is soaked in death, in trauma, in the psychic residue of decades of suffering, with sensitive individuals who enter the abandoned restaurant report feeling watched, feeling a presence, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and wrongness. The walls seem to absorb sound, creating pockets of unnatural silence. The air is cold even in summer, as if the building itself is dead, as if warmth and life cannot exist in a place where so many children died. Paranormal investigators who have studied locations similar to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, or rather the fictional accounts of such locations, note that places where children have died violently often become haunted in particularly intense ways. Children's spirits, they theorize, are more likely to become trapped, more likely to linger, because they do not understand death, because they are looking for their parents, because they believe that someone will come to save them. The spirits become confused, angry, desperate. They lash out at anyone who enters their space, not out of malice, but out of fear and confusion. They are children, even in death, and children do not always understand the consequences of their actions. Jeremy, trapped inside Bonnie, is still a child. He has been dead for decades, has killed numerous security guards, has existed in a state of undeath for longer than he was ever alive. But he is still, fundamentally, a 7 or 8-year-old boy who wants his parents, who wants to go home, who wants the nightmare to end. When Bonnie appears in the doorway of the security office, when those glowing eyes fix on the guard, when that mechanical body lurches forward to attack, it is not a monster that is hunting. It is a terrified, angry child who is lashing out at a world that has hurt him, who is trying desperately to find the person who killed him, who is hoping that if he can just find his killer and make him pay, then maybe, finally, he can rest. But rest never comes. The cycle continues. Bonnie hunts, guards die. The restaurant closes and reopens. New animatronics are built. New children are endangered. And through it all, Jeremy remains trapped, remains confused, remains angry. His existence is a testament to the failure of every system that should have protected him. The failure of his parents to keep him safe, the failure of the restaurant to provide adequate security, the failure of the police to catch his killer, the failure of society to prioritise children's safety over corporate profits. The story of Bonnie the Bunny is ultimately a story about the cost of negligence, about what happens when evil is allowed to flourish unchecked, about the price that children pay when adults fail in their duty to protect them. Every time Bonnie moves through the darkness, every time his eyes glow with that unnatural light, every time he reaches out with mechanical hands to grab another victim, we're witnessing the consequences of William Afton's crimes, of Fazbear Entertainment's cover-ups, of a society that values profit over people. And the horror of it is that the story is not entirely fictional. In the real world, children go missing. Predators use positions of trust to access victims. Corporations prioritise profits over safety. Cover-ups happen, justice fails. The dead do not come back as vengeful animatronics, but the trauma, the loss, the suffering, those are real. Bonnie the Bunny is a metaphor made manifest, a symbol of every child who's been failed by the systems meant to protect them, every victim whose killer was never caught, every family that never got closure or justice. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is dark and still, when you are alone and vulnerable, the story of Bonnie the Bunny takes on a different quality. It is no longer just a video game antagonist, no longer just a fictional horror story. It becomes something more primal, more real, because we all know, on some level, that there are monsters in the world. We all know that children are hurt, that evil exists, that sometimes the bad guys win and the innocent suffer. Bonnie is a manifestation of those fears, a reminder that the world is not always safe, that friendly faces can hide dark intentions, that death is not always the end of suffering. So when you hear that sound in the darkness, that heavy mechanical footstep, that low electronic groan, remember what it represents. Remember Jeremy, the child who trusted a man in a rabbit suit and paid for that trust with his life. Remember the other children, the other victims, the other souls trapped in machines. Remember that Bonnie is not just a monster, but a tragedy, a failure, a warning. And remember that in the real world, there are children who need protection, predators who need to be stopped, and systems that need to be fixed before more Jeremys are created, before more families are destroyed, before more innocence is lost. The bunny is watching. The bunny is waiting. The bunny remembers. And the bunny will never stop hunting, because the bunny is a child who cannot rest, a victim who cannot find peace, a soul that cannot move on. This is the curse of Bonnie the Bunny. This is the tragedy of Jeremy. This is the horror of Five Nights at Freddy's. And it all begins with a simple truth. Sometimes the monsters are real. Sometimes the nightmares don't end when you wake up. And sometimes the dead refuse to stay dead because the living have failed them too completely, too thoroughly, too absolutely for forgiveness or peace to ever be possible. Sleep well if you can, but know that somewhere in the darkness, Bonnie is still searching, still hunting, still hoping to find the person who killed him. And if you hear footsteps in the night, if you see glowing eyes in your doorway, if you feel the presence of something that should not be there, remember, it might just be Bonnie, the blue rabbit with the red bow tie, the entertainer turned executioner, the child turned monster, the victim turned villain. And he is looking for someone. He's always looking. He will never stop looking. because in death, as in life, some wrongs can never be made right, some wounds can never heal, and some souls can never rest. The nightmare continues, the hunt goes on, and Bonnie, forever trapped in his mechanical prison, forever searching for justice he will never find, forever lashing out at innocents who bear no guilt, remains a monument to tragedy, a symbol of failure, a warning that we ignore at our peril. This is his story. This is his curse. This is his eternal, unending nightmare. And it could have been prevented if only someone had cared enough to stop William Afton before he killed his first victim. If only someone had prioritised children's safety over corporate profits. If only someone had listened when the warnings came. But no one did. And so Bonnie hunts, and Jeremy suffers, and the cycle continues, unbroken, unstoppable, eternal. This is the lore of Bonnie the Bunny. This is the horror of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This is the price of negligence, the cost of evil, the weight of tragedy. And it all begins with a child who trusted a man in a rabbit suit and ended with a soul trapped forever in a machine, searching endlessly for a justice that will never come, for a peace that cannot exist, for an ending to a nightmare that has no end. The physical deterioration of Bonnie over the years mirrors the deterioration of Jeremy's soul. When the animatronic was new, when Jeremy had just been killed and his soul freshly bound to the machine, there was perhaps still some hope, some possibility of salvation. But as years passed, as the animatronic's body decayed and broke down, as Jeremy killed more and more innocent people, that hope faded. The rust and stains on Bonnie's exterior reflect the corruption of Jeremy's spirit, the way that prolonged suffering and rage have transformed an innocent child into something monstrous. The missing face on withered Bonnie is particularly symbolic. Without a face, Bonnie becomes less recognisable as a character, less identifiable as the friendly entertainer he once was. The exposed endoskeleton, the bare metal skull with its empty eye sockets and mechanical jaw, reveals the truth beneath the costume, that Bonnie is not a living thing, not even really a character, but a machine, a tool, a prison. The missing face also reflects Jeremy's own loss of identity. He can no longer remember what he looked like when he was alive. He can no longer remember his own face. He's become Bonnie, his human identity subsumed by the animatronic, his sense of self eroded by decades of existing as something other than human. The guitar that Bonnie carries is another tragic detail. In life, Jeremy may have loved music. He may have wanted to learn to play an instrument. He may have been excited to see Bonnie perform, to hear the band play, to experience the joy of live music. But now, trapped inside Bonnie, Jeremy is forever associated with a guitar he cannot truly play, with music he cannot truly create. The guitar has become just another part of his prison, another reminder of the life he lost, another symbol of the entertainment and joy that has been twisted into horror and death. When Bonnie moves through the restaurant at night, his path is not random. He follows patterns, routines, behaviours that suggest some remnant of programming mixed with Jeremy's confused consciousness. He checks the supply closet, perhaps because that is where cleaning supplies are kept, where the smell of chemicals might mask the smell of decay. He visits the backstage area where spare animatronic parts are stored, where he might see other versions of himself, other Bonnies in various states of assembly and disassembly. He moves through the West Hall, approaching the security office from a specific direction, following a route that has been burned into his mechanical memory through countless repetitions. But within these patterns, there are moments of unpredictability, moments when Jeremy's consciousness seems to assert itself more strongly. Sometimes Bonnie moves faster than he should, as if driven by sudden rage or urgency. Sometimes he appears in places he should not be able to reach, as if the rules of physics and space do not fully apply to him. Sometimes he stands motionless in a doorway for long minutes, his head tilted, his eyes glowing, as if he's trying to remember something, trying to understand something, trying to make sense of his existence. These moments of apparent consciousness are perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Bonnie's behaviour. They suggest that Jeremy is still in there, still aware, still suffering. When Bonnie tilts his head and stares at a security guard, it is not just a machine malfunctioning or following programming. It is a child, confused and frightened, trying to understand why he is trapped, why he cannot leave, why he feels compelled to hurt people. In those moments, the security guard is not just facing a dangerous animatronic, they are facing a victim, a tragedy, a soul in torment, and there is nothing they can do to help. No way to free Jeremy from his prison, no way to give him the peace he desperately needs. The sound design associated with Bonnie adds another layer to the horror. The heavy footsteps, the mechanical groaning, the electronic distortion. These sounds are not just scary because they signal danger. They are scary because they are wrong, because they represent something that should not exist. Bonnie should be silent when he moves, or at most should produce the quiet whir of servos and motors. But the sounds he makes are louder. They are more organic, more suggestive of something alive and in pain. The groaning sounds like a person trying to speak but unable to form words. The footsteps sound like someone struggling to walk, dragging a damaged body forward through sheer force of will. These sounds are the audio manifestation of Jeremy's suffering, the mechanical expression of a soul in agony. In the original Five Nights at Freddy's game, there is a moment that many players remember vividly. The first time Bonnie appears in the left doorway of the office. The player has been watching the security cameras tracking the animatronic's movements, feeling relatively safe behind the desk. Then they lower the camera, and Bonnie is there, standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing, his body filling the frame. The player has only seconds to close the door before Bonnie enters and kills them. That moment of sudden appearance, of realizing that the threat is no longer distant but immediate, is one of the most effective jump scares in gaming history. But it is effective not just because it is sudden, but because it represents a fundamental shift in the player's situation. They are no longer the observer, they are now the prey. That moment also represents Jeremy's perspective. For most of the night he's been searching, moving through empty rooms, checking dark corners, looking for his killer. And then he finds someone, a person, alone, vulnerable. And in that moment Jeremy believes, or hopes, or desperately wants to believe, that this person might be William Afton, might be the man who killed him. This might be his chance for revenge, his opportunity to make his killer pay. So Bonnie moves forward, driven by a child's desperate hope and a ghost's relentless rage. And if the door closes in time, if the security guard survives, Jeremy is left standing in the hallway, confused and frustrated, forced to continue his search, forced to continue his hunt, forced to continue existing in his nightmare. The relationship between Bonnie and the other animatronics is complex and tragic. They are not friends, not really, because friendship requires a level of consciousness and communication that they no longer possess. but they are connected, bound together by their shared trauma, their shared fate, their shared imprisonment. When one animatronic moves, the others seem to become more active, as if they are coordinating, as if they are working together. But this coordination is not strategic or planned. It is more like a resonance, like the way tuning forks vibrate in sympathy with each other. One soul's rage triggers another's. One ghost's hunt inspires another's. They are separate nightmares that happen to occupy the same space, but their nightmares are similar enough that they reinforce each other, amplify each other, create a collective horror that is greater than the sum of its parts. Freddy, possessed by Gabriel, seems to take a leadership role among the animatronics, moving more slowly and deliberately than the others, appearing less frequently but with more certainty. Chica, possessed by Susie, is relentless and aggressive, perhaps driven by the betrayal she feels at having been lied to about her dog. Foxy, possessed by Fritz, is the most overtly violent, thus charging down the hallway when he attacks, making no attempt at stealth or subtlety. And Golden Freddy, possessed by Cassidy, exists outside the normal rules, appearing and disappearing without warning, crashing reality itself, driven by a hatred so intense that it warps the fabric of the game world. But Bonnie, possessed by Jeremy, is perhaps the most tragic of all, because he is the most active, the most persistent, the most desperate. He leaves the stage first. He moves through the restaurant most frequently. He appears in the doorway more often than any other animatronic. This suggests that Jeremy's need for revenge, his desperation to find his killer, his inability to rest, is stronger than the other children's. Or perhaps it simply means that Jeremy's more confused, more lost, more unable to understand what has happened to him. He searches constantly because he does not know what else to do, because searching is the only thing that gives his existence any purpose. Because if he stops searching, he will have to confront the reality of his situation, that he is dead, that he is trapped, that there is no escape, that his suffering will never end. The various iterations of Bonnie across different games as timelines represent different aspects of Jeremy's trauma and different stages of his deterioration. Classic Bonnie from the first game is the most recognisable, still clearly a character despite the wear and damage. Withered Bonnie from the second game is more damaged, more obviously broken, his missing face revealing the horror beneath the costume. Toy Bonnie, also from the second game, is a newer model, brighter and more colourful but still possessed, still dangerous, suggesting that the curse has spread beyond the original animatronics to infect even their replacements. Nightmare Bonnie, from the fourth game, is a manifestation of pure terror, a version of Bonnie that exists only in nightmares, with sharp teeth and claws and an appearance designed to traumatise. And Glamrock Bonnie, from later games, represents yet another iteration, another attempt to rebrand and sanitize the character, another failure to escape the curse. Each version of Bonnie carries some echo of Jeremy's soul, some fragment of his trauma. The curse has become so deeply embedded in the character that it cannot be removed by simply building a new animatronic. The very concept of Bonnie is haunted. Every blue rabbit with a red bow tie, every guitar-playing animatronic, every friendly entertainer designed to make children smile carries the taint of Jeremy's death. It is as if the tragedy has infected the archetype itself, ensuring that no version of Bonnie can ever be truly innocent, truly safe, truly free from the horror of what happened in that back room in June of 1985. The employees of Fazbear Entertainment who have worked with the animatronics over the years have their own stories, their own traumas. Technicians who have tried to repair Bonnie report feeling uneasy around the animatronic, feeling watched, feeling as if the machine is aware of them in a way that machines should not be. Some have reported hearing sounds coming from inside Bonnie when he is powered down. Whispers, groans, sounds that might be mechanical malfunctions or might be something else. Others have reported that Bonnie's eyes seem to follow them as they work, tracking their movements even when the animatronic is supposedly inactive. One technician, in a report that was later sealed by the company, described opening Bonnie's chest cavity to access the internal mechanisms and finding something that should not have been there. The report is vague, redacted in places, but it mentions organic material, unusual odour, and immediate psychological distress. The technician quit the same day and refused to return to any Fazbear Entertainment location. The company's response was not to investigate the technician's claims, but to seal the report and threaten legal action if the technician spoke publicly about what they had found. This pattern of cover-up and denial has characterized Fazbear Entertainment's response to every incident, every death, every piece of evidence that something is deeply wrong with the animatronics. The legal history of Fazbear Entertainment is a labyrinth of lawsuits, settlements, and sealed records. Families of missing children have sued. Families of dead security guards have sued. Former employees have sued. But the company has deep pockets and aggressive lawyers, and most cases are settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements that prevent the plaintiffs from speaking publicly about what happened. The few cases that have gone to trial have resulted in verdicts that favour the company, often because the evidence is circumstantial, because the bodies are never found, because the truth is too bizarre to be believed. How do you prove in court that animatronics are possessed by the ghosts of murdered children? How do you convince a jury that a corporation has been covering up supernatural murders for decades? The legal system is not equipped to handle the reality of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and so justice remains elusive, and the company continues to operate, continues to endanger children, continues to profit from tragedy. The cultural impact of Bonnie and the other animatronics extends beyond the immediate victims and their families. The story of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has become an urban legend, a cautionary tale, a source of nightmares for a generation of children who grew up hearing whispers about the haunted restaurant where animatronics come alive at night. Parents use the story to scare their children into behaving. If you don't listen, I'll take you to Freddy Fazbear's and leave you there overnight. Teenagers dare each other to break into abandoned Fazbear locations, to spend a night in the building, to see if the stories are true. Most of these dares end with the teenagers fleeing in terror after hearing sounds or seeing shadows or simply feeling the overwhelming wrongness of the place. A few end with the teenagers never being seen again, their disappearances added to the long list of unsolved cases associated with Fazbear Entertainment. The internet has amplified the legend, with forums and websites dedicated to discussing the law, analysing the evidence, trying to piece together the true story of what happened at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Some of these discussions are based on facts, on leaked documents and testimony from former employees. Others are pure speculation, conspiracy theories that range from plausible to absurd. But all of them share a common thread: the recognition that something terrible happened, that children died, that justice was not served, and that the horror continues to this day. Bonnie has become an icon of this horror, a symbol recognised even by people who have never set foot in a Fazbear Entertainment location. The image of the blue rabbit with glowing eyes, standing in a darkened doorway, has been reproduced in countless forms: fan art, cosplay, merchandise, both official and unofficial. Some people are drawn to Bonnie because they find the character scary, because they enjoy the thrill of horror. Others are drawn to Bonnie because they recognise the tragedy beneath the terror, because they see Jeremy's story as a metaphor for all the children who have been failed by the systems meant to protect them. There is a strange duality to Bonnie's existence in popular culture. On one hand, he is a monster, a killer, a source of nightmares. On the other hand, he is a victim, a tragedy, a symbol of innocence destroyed. This duality makes Bonnie more complex and more disturbing than a simple villain would be. We cannot simply hate Bonnie because Bonnie is Jeremy, and Jeremy did nothing wrong. Jeremy was a child who went to a birthday party and never came home. Jeremy deserves our sympathy, our compassion, our grief. But Bonnie has killed people, has caused suffering, has created new victims and new tragedies. Bonnie deserves our fear, our caution, our recognition of the danger he represents. Reconciling these two perspectives, Bonnie as victim and Bonnie as monster, is difficult, uncomfortable, and necessary. It forces us to confront the reality that victims can become perpetrators, that suffering can breed more suffering, that the cycle of violence and trauma can continue across generations if it is not actively broken. The question of how to break the cycle, how to free Jeremy and the other children from their mechanical prisons, has no easy answer. Destroying the animatronics does not seem to work. The spirits remain, clinging to the fragments, unable or unwilling to move on. Bringing William Afton to justice might help, but Afton himself is trapped in his own mechanical prison, suffering his own eternal torment, and his punishment does not seem to bring peace to his victims. And some believe that the only way to free the children is to help them remember who they were, to restore their human identities, to give them back the sense of self that has been eroded by years of existing as machines. Others believe that the children must be helped to forgive, to let go of their rage and their need for revenge, to accept their deaths and move on to whatever comes next. But these solutions require a level of intervention and understanding that no one seems capable of providing. The children cannot communicate clearly. They cannot express what they need or want. They are trapped in a state of confusion and rage that makes meaningful interaction nearly impossible. And the people who might be able to help, therapists, priests, their paranormal investigators, are either unaware of the situation or unable to access the children's spirits in any meaningful way. So the children remain trapped, and the cycle continues, and Bonnie keeps hunting through the darkness, searching for a justice that will never come, for a peace that cannot exist, for an ending to a nightmare that has no end. In the deepest hours of the night, when sleep is elusive and the mind turns to dark thoughts, the story of Bonnie the Bunny takes on a weight that goes beyond entertainment or fiction. It becomes a meditation on suffering, on injustice, on the terrible things that happen when evil is allowed to flourish and when the innocent are not protected. Jeremy's story is not unique. In the real world, children are murdered, killers go free, families are destroyed, and the survivors are left to carry the weight of that trauma for the rest of their lives, unable to move on, unable to find peace, trapped in their own prisons of grief and rage and unanswered questions. Bonnie is a manifestation of that trauma, a symbol of what happens when justice fails and when the dead cannot rest. Every time Bonnie appears in a doorway, every time his eyes glow in the darkness, every time he reaches out with mechanical hands to grab another victim, we are witnessing the consequences of failure. The failure to protect Jeremy, the failure to catch William Afton, the failure to prioritise children's safety over corporate profits, the failure to create a world where children can be safe and innocent and free from harm. And so Bonnie hunts, and Jeremy suffers, and the nightmare continues, night after night, as year after year, decade after decade, with no end in sight. The blue rabbit with the red bow tie, the entertainer turned executioner, the child turned monster, the victim turned villain, remains trapped in his mechanical prison, searching endlessly for the person who killed him, lashing out at innocents who bear no guilt, unable to rest, unable to heal, unable to escape the horror of his own existence. This is the lore of Bonnie the Bunny. This is the tragedy of Jeremy. This is the curse of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And it serves as a reminder, a warning, a call to action. We must protect children. We must hold killers accountable. We must prioritise safety over profits. We must create systems that work, that prevent tragedies like Jeremy's death from happening, that ensure that when evil does occur, justice is swift and certain and complete. Because if we do not, if we continue to fail in our duty to protect the innocent, then we create more Jeremys, more victims, more souls trapped in prisons of trauma and rage. We create more Bonnies, more monsters born from tragedy, more nightmares that hunt through the darkness, and we perpetuate a cycle of violence and suffering that has no end, that spreads across generations, that infects everything it touches. The bunny is watching. The bunny is waiting. The bunny remembers. And the bunny will never stop hunting because we have failed him, because we have allowed his killer to escape justice, because we have prioritised entertainment and profit over his safety and his life. This is Bonnie's curse. This is Jeremy's tragedy. This is our failure. And until we acknowledge that failure, until we commit to doing better, until we create a world where children like Jeremy are truly safe, the nightmare will continue. The hunt will go on. And Bonnie, forever trapped in his mechanical prison, forever searching for justice he will never find, will remain a monument to our collective shame, a symbol of our failure to protect the most vulnerable among us, a warning that we ignore at our peril. Sleep well if you can. But remember, somewhere in the darkness, Bonnie is still searching, and he is looking for all of us, because we are all complicit in the systems that failed Jeremy, in the society that allowed William Afton to kill with impunity, in the world that values profit over people and entertainment over safety. We're all, in some small way, responsible for Jeremy's death and for his eternal suffering. And until we accept that responsibility and commit to change, Bonnie will continue to hunt, and the nightmare will never end.